Hi, thank you for joining me. My name is Mindy Mandell, and this video is part of a series of videos reading through Plato's Statesman. And as you can see, this translation we're using is by J.B. Skemp. And this is in a collection of Plato's dialogues called The Collected Dialogues of Plato. As always, I will include a link for this PDF in the description box below. Okay, just as a reminder of where we ended off, the highlight of what we looked at last week was that there are two types of standards that we're looking at. We can talk about relativity, and that's here in our physical world. Everything is relative to everything else. But he suggested that there is also another kind of comparison to what he called a due measure. And we saw that this was talking about the absolute realities. We can judge justice here according to true justice, goodness here according to true goodness, and so on. And that was the highlight of what we looked at last time. And now we're going to pick it up at 285C, where they wrapped up that part of the discussion. The stranger says, so much for that theme, and now we're going to move on to a new theme. So let's pick it up from here. He says, so much for that theme. Now let us prepare to entertain another which has to do not only with our present inquiry, but with all discussions of this kind as well. What is it? Suppose someone asked us this question about our class of elementary school children learning to read. When a child is asked what letters spell a word, it can be any word you please. Are we to regard this exercise as undertaken to discover the correct spelling of the particular word the teacher set, or as designed rather to make the child better able to deal with all words he may be asked to spell? Well, surely we reply that the purpose is to teach him to read them all. How then does this principle apply to our present search for the statesman? Why did we set ourselves the problem? Is our chief purpose to find the statesman, or have we the larger aim of becoming better philosophers, more able to tackle all questions? Well, here too the answer is clear. We aim to be able to solve all problems. And that there is really pointing to what this dialogue is about in one level, that we do want to be better at solving all problems, at being better at being philosophers, better at dialectic. And so there's a lot of advice about dialectic scattered throughout, right? And so we're always thinking about that bigger picture of what can we take from this that we can apply to everything we do in philosophy. Now, that said, it doesn't mean that there's no value in looking for the statesman. Certainly, if we were only looking for the statesman on the surface level, I would agree with this, that it's not really that important to us as philosophers. However, there is that deeper sense that we're understanding the statesman, the philosophical statesman, if you will, that follows from the Republic. And I'll be speaking of that more as we go on. So we have this dual purpose. And also the student as well has that dual purpose. They do want to spell that word that's being asked, but that's not the full purpose of the teacher's assignment. And so that point is well taken. And we should take the same point as well. So young Socrates agreed that we aim to be able to solve all problems. And the stranger says, exactly. For I cannot think that any reasonable person would want to trace down the definition of the art of weaving just for its own sake. But there is a paradox here, which, it seems to me, most thinkers have failed to notice. Likenesses which the senses can grasp are available in nature to those real existents which are in themselves easy to understand. So that when someone asks for an account of these existence, one has no trouble at all. One can simply indicate the sensible likeness and dispense with any account in words. But to the highest and most important class of existence, the highest and most important class of existence. That's what we're focused on here. There are no corresponding visible resemblances, no work of nature clear for all to look upon. In these cases, nothing visible can be pointed out to satisfy the inquiring mind. The instructor cannot cause the inquirer to perceive something with one or other of his senses, and so make him really satisfied that he understands the thing under discussion. Therefore, we must train ourselves to give and to understand a rational account of every existent thing. For the existence which have no visible embodiment, the existence which are of highest value and chief importance, are demonstrable only by reason, and are not to be apprehended by any other means. All our present discussions have the aim of training us to apprehend this highest class of existence. For purposes of practice, however, it is easier in every case to work on lesser objects rather than on greater ones. Now, young Socrates is very quick to just say, you're quite right. But there's actually quite a bit going on here, and it's worth going back over it. So, some true existence, real existence, there you're talking about, let's see if I can highlight that. You're talking about ontos there, being in the highest sense, real existence. Now, some of them, like talking about a tree, you can just point to a physical tree, and there you have your sensible likeness of it. Okay, the bottom part, sensible likeness. But the highest and most important class do not have a physical example of them. For example, goodness, justice, even beauty. Yes, there are things we can point to say that is a beautiful person, a beautiful sunset, but beauty itself, it's hard to capture in that way. It's not enough. We must train ourselves to give and understand a rational account of every existent thing. And rational account here is logos. We must train ourselves to give and to understand the logos of every existent thing. And you see it again here as well. Sorry, it's difficult to highlight. Here as well. This is logos. So he goes on, we must train ourselves to give and to understand a logos of every existent thing, true beings we're talking about here, reality itself, eidos. I don't have it marked. All right, for the existence which have no visible embodiment, the existence which are of the highest value, the chief importance, the highest of the eidos, they are demonstrable only by logos, and they're not to be apprehended by any other means. Okay, so that's where this dialogue is really pointing to. Stranger goes on to say, let us then recall what led us to this long digression on these matters. What was it? Was it not mainly due to the impatience that we felt and expressed at the long-windedness, as we presume to call it, of our definition of the art of weaving? And it was long, and yes, I was one of the people who complaining a little bit about it, but I was also pointing out that there's a real point to doing it. But we felt a like impatience with the long account of reversal of rotation in the universe and with our inquiry into the sophist when we had to discuss the existence of non-being. The reference to sophist is to the dialogue sophist, so that discussion is obviously not here. The other one here, this was the myth of Kronos and Zeus, of the reversal of the rotation. That one I didn't find too long. I enjoy mythology. I don't know how you felt. Let me know in the comments section how you felt. We conceived the notion that these discussions had been too lengthy, and we blamed ourselves for this because we feared that they had been irrelevant too. Please realize, therefore, that the principles we have just worked out together apply to all discussions of this kind, and not just to this one, and that they are intended to prevent any like apprehensions in the future. It shall be so, sir, but pray proceed. I say then that it is your duty and mine to observe the principles we have just laid down whenever we have to accord praise or blame to an argument on the score of its length or its brevity. The length of one discourse is not to be compared simply with the length of another. We said just now that we must never forget the second section of the art of measuring, and it is the standard we must always apply in judgments like these. The standard of suitability, I mean. Quite so. Now, more accurately, though, that second section was the due measure. So in other words, you don't want to just say, well, this conversation is longer than other ones that I've had. And in that relative sense, it seems long. You have to ask yourself, is it necessary? Is it suitable for this topic to have this length of discussion? How long of a discussion do I need for this topic? And he's going to go into that more here. Young Socrates says, quite so. Yes, but even suitability is not in every case an adequate criterion. For instance, we shall not look for such length in an argument as is suitable for giving pleasure, except as a very incidental consideration. Again, ease and speed in reaching the answer to the problem propounded are not commendable, but our principle requires that this be only a secondary, not a primary reason for commending an argument. What we must value first and foremost, above all else, is the philosophical method itself. The philosophical method itself. This is what we're going to value. And this consists in ability to divide according to real forms. Real forms, you can probably guess, is eidos. Dividing according to real forms. And this is often a way that we talk about dialectic. And so that is the philosophical method that he's talking about. If, therefore, either a full-length statement of an argument or an unusually brief one leaves the hearer more able to find real forms, it is this presentation of it which must be diligently carried through. There must be no expression of annoyance at its length or at its brevity, as the case may be. And so that's the only measure, is what is the best way to make your point known and understood and clear, to find the real forms, to do the dialectic search that you need to do. Sometimes a brief conversation is ideal, sometimes a lengthier one. It doesn't matter, brief or lengthy. What matters is, does this bring you to insight? Furthermore, if we find a person who criticizes the length of an argument while a discussion like the present one is in progress and refuses to wait for the proper rounding off of the process of reasoning, he is not to be permitted to escape thus with a mere grumble that these discussions are long drawn out. He must be required to support his grumble with a proof that a briefer statement of the case would have left him and his fellow disputants better philosophers, more able to demonstrate real truth by reasoned argument. Blame and praise on other grounds, aimed at other merely incidental traits in our discourse, we must simply ignore and act as though we had not heard them at all. Now we may leave this topic if I carry you with me in this judgment. Let us go back to the Statesman, our real subject, and set beside him for comparison the art of weaving as we have just defined it. I will just say, in passing here, that I have met people over the years who are very long-winded and want to use this sort of argument as a defense for being very long-winded. But what he is saying here is that a briefer statement of the case may sometimes be better. And if that's what demonstrates real truth by reasoned argument, if you're just going off on lots of tangents and trying to weave everything together, that's not necessarily doing ideal dialectic as he's describing it here. So this is not a license to be long-winded. Okay, but he wants to go back to talking about the statesman. Young Socrates says, excellent, let's do as you say. Well then, the kingly art has been set apart from most of those occupying the same region, from all, that is to say, which have to do with control of herds. But in the actual community of citizens, there are other arts not yet distinguished from statesmanship. They comprise both contributory and directive productive arts, and these must first be distinguished. Very well. Do you realize that in this case they resist division into two? I think that the reason will become evident to us as we go on to enumerate them. Let us do so then. Seeing that we cannot bisect them, let us divide them according to their natural divisions, as we would carve a sacrificial victim. Very graphic imagery there. I assume he's talking about an animal, not a human, as animal sacrifices were common in this day. We must in every case divide into the minimum number of divisions that the structure permits. How shall we do it then in the present instance? As we did before, all the arts which provide tools for weaving we distinguished then as contributory. We did. We must do the same now as then, but with even greater care. Every art which fashions any object, large or small, which ministers to the needs of an organized human community, must be classed as contributory. For without the things provided by these arts, there could be no community and no art of rule. And yet we can hardly regard it as the duty of the kingly art to produce any of these things. No. I shall pause here for a moment to just bring us back up to speed, because it has been at least a week since maybe you've seen the previous section. And so that was where he took some of the other arts that would surround weaving, like tending to the sheep and shaving the sheep and carding their wool and making the tools that are necessary. All of these things were called contributory. Now they're going to do the same thing, because this is an analogy to the statesman, weaving as an analogy to the statesman. Therefore, what they did with weaving, they're now going to do with the statesman. So they're going to look for all of the contributory arts that are not statesmanship itself, but contribute to what the statesman does. Okay. We're attempting a difficult thing when we try to distinguish this instrumental class of arts from the others, for anything whatever can be shown with some plausibility to be an instrumental means to something or other. However, there is a class of things a community must acquire to which we must proceed to give a different name. In what way different? In that its function differs from that of instruments. It is not made as an instrument is with a view to the production of something, but in order to preserve a thing once it has been produced. Okay, there it is. Preserve. What kind of thing do you mean? A class of objects wrought in the greatest variety of shapes and used for holding liquids or solids, some made for standing on the fire, some not able to do so. As a general name, we term such an object a container, It is a ubiquitous class of objects, and again, I think, the arts manufacturing it have nothing whatever to do with the art of the ruler which we are now seeking. Nothing at all. We must now recognize a third class of things to be acquired, also a very large one. Some things belonging to it are on land, others on water. Some move from place to place, others do not. Some are of high honor, others are not so distinguished. All share one name and form a class because each is made to support something or serve as a base for something. What common name have they? Carriage, I should say, and the production of such things is the work of the carpenter, the potter, or the chariot builder, not the statesman. Okay, I'll underline it. The carriage. Okay, and by the way, the instrumental class, I should have highlighted as well. Okay, I'll just do that. Sorry, this highlighter's really a work of art here. Okay, and now we have a fourth class. Must we not distinguish from all these three a further class to which most of the things mentioned in our definition of weaving belong? The whole class of clothing. Most armor, all walls, all earth or stonework defenses erected around a city, and many other such things. All exist for defensive protection, and so the whole class can best be called defenses. To provide these is in most cases the work of the builder or weaver, and never that of the statesman. So we're going to underline. I'm not highlighting weaver, I'm trying to underline defenses. Yeah, I can't quite get the word. Okay. Might we agree to a fifth class, including all arts concerned in decoration or portraiture and every art which produces artistic representations, whether in these visual arts or for the ear in poetry and music? The works that all of these arts produce are wrought simply to give pleasure, and all may properly be included under one description. What is that? We use the expression diversion, do we not? What of it? Then this is the name we can apply to the products of this whole group of arts. None of them has a serious purpose. All are performed for pure amusement. So diversion. There, we can underline it. Okay. Yeah, getting to the end of the section. I think I understand this too. Consider now those arts which provide the stuffs which are wrought by the arts we have been talking about. This is a most various class of arts. Often such an art is itself working on the products of several yet more primitive arts. Shall we not name this the sixth kind? What are you thinking? Gold and silver and all mined metals. All the pioneer work done by the woodsman and the sawmill to provide material for carpentry and wickerwork, and the curier's art, which removes the skins of animals, the art of stripping bark, which has the same function in the plant realm, and all arts kindred to these, the arts of making cork, papyrus, and rope. All these arts produce the main types of raw material for working up into the more complex kinds of objects which we use. Let us call this class of objects by the general description basic material at the stage of its first working when it's not yet wrought into particular objects. Very long name. And the production of this is obviously no concern of the kingly science. I'm just going to highlight basic material. It's a very long name. All right. We come lastly to the getting of food, and of all the substances, the parts of which are capable of combining with the parts of the body to promote its health. This we will make a seventh class and call it nourishment. Ooh, that almost worked. We'll call it nourishment unless we can find some better name for it. Provision of it is rightly to be assigned to the arts of farming. hunting, gymnastics, medicine, or butchering, rather than to political science. Of course. I think that possessions of practically every kind that we find belonging to men have been enumerated in these 7 classes, with the single exception of tame living creatures. And that's what he's calling humans, right? Remember, earlier in the dialogue, he called humans tame living creatures. Listen while I run through the list. First place in it should really have been taken by basic material at its first working. After that come instruments, and then vessels, carriages, defenses, diversions, and nourishments. Notice there that he took the same categories we just went through, but he put them in order. Which one comes first, then which follows it. We may neglect any class of merely slight importance which may have escaped us, for it can be made to fit into one or other of these main classes. For example, consider the class consisting of coins, seals, and every other kind of engraved dies. These have not, as a class, one of the great classes with which all coincide. Some have to be subsumed under diversions, some under instruments. It is a forced classification, but they can be made to fit into one or other of these classes somehow or other. As for tame animals, again humans, other than slaves, all these clearly come under the art of nourishing herds, which we have previously analyzed. Yes, they do. I should maybe just make a brief note here because many people are understandably uncomfortable with the mention of slaves in Plato's dialogues. He did not tackle the social issue of the wrong of slavery. What he did instead was he would simply use the society as it existed to create analogies, really, that run through all of his dialogues. And so you want to see how it's used analogously. It is not in any way suggesting that he supported slavery. Okay, going back to the dialogue, he says that the class that remains then is that of slaves and personal servants of all kinds. It is just here that I strongly suspect that those will be discovered who really dispute the fashioning of the web of state with the king in the way that we found spinners, carders, and the rest disputing the fashioning of clothes with the weaver. All the others, since they pursue what we have described as contributory arts, have been disposed of along with their occupations, which we have enumerated just now, and thus they have all been severed from any share in the kingly art of ruling the state. So at any rate it would seem. Come then, let us examine the rest and approach them more closely to scrutinize them more effectively. Let us do so. The most extensive class of servants, as seen from our new vantage point, we find to be engaged in pursuits and sunk in the condition of life quite contrary to those we had suspected we might discover. Whom do you refer? To those who are bought and sold and so become their master's property. No one would think of challenging our description of these as slaves, or our contention that they cannot possibly claim any share in the practice of the art of ruling. That goes without saying. But what of servants who are personally free? What of those among them who of their own volition place themselves and their services at the disposal of the various craftsmen we have named and effect a systematic distribution of agricultural and manufactured products, maintaining an economic balance between them? Some of these do their work at home in the market square, but others are travelers from city to city, either overland or by sea routes. They exchange money for goods or one currency for another. Our names for them are money changers, merchants, venturers, retailers. They cannot be said to dispute the province of the ruler, can they? I wonder if they might in the realm of commerce, that is to say. Well, certainly not. You can be sure that such men who can be hired for pay, who work for a daily wage and who are always ready to work for any employer, will never be found daring to claim any share in the art of ruling. No, of course not. But there are those who render other kinds of service. What kind of service? Whom do you mean? Heralds and clerks, who often develop great facility from long performance of their form of service, and certain other very able minor civil servants, who do all manner of administrative work for the elected officials. What shall we call these? What you just called them, civil servants, but not rulers exercising an independent authority in the state. I was not cheated by a mere dream, I think, when I said that it was here that the king's serious challengers in the art of rule would reveal themselves. But how strange to have to look for them in a servant class. Yes, very strange. Now, by the way, this discussion of various social classes, this is very much reminiscent of the Republic as well, where he was again building an analogy of a city-state to the soul and looking for the various classes of people within the soul. And none of these classes were the rulers. And so there's where you can see a nice parallel that takes you away from the social issues that talking about servants and slaves would open up. And he says here, how strange to have to look for these people who challenge the king in a servant class. Very strange. Now let us tackle those we have not yet put under examination. First come the soothsayers, practicing their particular form of expert ministration. For do we not recognize them as serving as interpreters of the gods to men? Yes. Next come the priestly tribe. According to the Orthodox view, they understand how to offer our gifts to the gods in sacrifices in a manner pleasing to them. And they know, too, the right forms of prayer for petitioning the gods to bestow blessings on us. Both of these expert activities are parts of the art of ministration, are they not? Well, it would seem that they are. In that case, I think that we are coming at last upon the tracks of our query, so to speak. For the priest and the diviner have great social standing and a keen sense of their own importance. They win veneration and respect because of the high tasks they undertake. This is shown in the fact that in Egypt, none can be king unless he belongs to the priestly caste. And if a man of some other caste succeeds in forcing his way to the throne, he must then be made a priest by special ordination. In many of the Greek cities also, one finds that the duty of making the chief sacrifice on the state's behalf is laid upon the chief officers of state. We have a very striking example of it here in Athens, for I am led to understand that the most solemn ancestral sacrifices of this nation are the responsibility of the archon, whom the lot designates as King Archon. That is so. Very well. We must study these kings chosen by lot and these priests with their ministerial assistants very closely. But we must also look at another group, quite a large mob, in fact, which is coming clearly into view now that all of these particular groups have been distinguished. And who are these you speak of? A very queer crowd. What do you mean? A race of many tribes, or so they seem to be at first sight. Some are like lions, some like centaurs, or similar monsters. A great many are satyrs or chameleons, beasts that are masters of quick change in order to conceal their weakness. Indeed, they take each other's shapes and characters with bewildering rapidity. Yes, Socrates, I think I have now identified these gentlemen. Tell me about them. You seem to look upon a strange sight. Yes, strange until recognized. I was actually impressed by them myself at first sight, coming suddenly on this strange cry of players acting their part in public life. I did not know what to make of them. What players can these be? The chief wizards among all the sophists, the chief pundits of the deceiver's art. Such impersonators are hard to distinguish from the real statesmen and kings. Yet we must distinguish them and thrust them aside if we are to see clearly the king we are seeking. Well, we must not abandon the search. No, I agree. Tell me this now. Well, is not monarchy one of the possible forms of government as we know it? Yes. And next to monarchy, one would naturally mention the constitution in which it is the few who wield power. Yes. Then the third type must be the rule of the many, democracy as it is called. Of course. These are the three main constitutions. So let me pause for a moment to highlight those if I possibly can. Sometimes from the back it works better. Okay, we'll underline part of it. So there's monarchy. There's no name given to the rule by the few, although that is oligarchy in Greek. And the third type is democracy. Okay, so these are the three main constitutions. Oh, that one highlighted. But do not the three, in a sense, become five by evolving two further types out of themselves? Well, what are these? If we consider the violence or consent, the poverty or riches, the law-abidingness or disregard of law which they exhibit, we shall find that two of the three forms of government are really twofold and can therefore be divided. Monarchy, then, yields us two forms called tyranny and constitutional monarchy. I'm going to highlight them together because that's easier for me. Okay, so you have your monarchy here. Now it's broken into tyranny, like what was that? Royalty. Yes, another translation used royalty here. Tyranny and royalty. So monarchy is broken into two forms, tyranny and royalty. Constitutions where the few wield power can always be similarly divided. The subdivisions are aristocracy and oligarchy. That sort of works. So this few is broken down into aristocracy and oligarchy. In the case of democracy, we do not usually alter the name. Democracy is always democracy, whether the masses control the wealthy by force or by consent, and whether or not it abides strictly by the laws. And he says that is true. So now we have five groups. We have tyranny, constitutional monarchy or royalty, aristocracy, oligarchy, and democracy. What then? Do we imagine that any of these constitutions can be declared a true constitution, so long as the only criteria for judging it are whether one, few, or many rule, whether it be rich or poor, whether it rule by violence or consent, whether it have or lack a code of laws? But what prevents our judging it to be a true constitution by such criteria? Try to follow what I'm going to say, and you will be bound to see more clearly. What line are you going to take? Shall we abide by our original argument, Or are we now going against it? Which argument do you mean? We decided, did we not, that the art of rule is one of the sciences. So rulership is a science. Furthermore, we agreed that it is a particular kind of science. Out of the whole class of sciences or bodies of knowledge, we selected the judging class, and more particularly, the directive class. We did. We divided the directive into direction of lifeless things and direction of living beings. And by this process of subdivision, we arrive by regular stages where we are now, never losing sight of the fact that statesmanship is a form of knowledge, but unable as yet to say precisely what form of knowledge it is. You are quite right. Do we realize then that the real criterion on judging constitutions must not be whether few or many rule, whether rule is by violence or consent, or whether the rulers are poor or rich? If we are going to abide by our previous conclusions, the criterion must be the presence or absence of an art directing the ruling. Okay, now this statement is certainly on the surface a rather shocking one, that whether it's by violence or consent, it doesn't matter, right? So that's something that he needs to explain. We've got an IOU from him now, because he owes us an explanation there. Yes, for we simply must abide by those conclusions. So that's what we're looking for, the presence or absence of an art directing the ruling. Then we're forced to look at the issue in this light. In which, if any, of these constitutions do we find the art of ruling being practiced in the actual government of men? What art is more difficult to learn? But what art is more important to us? We must see it for what it is, so as to be able to decide which are the other public figures we must remove from the true king's company. Those personages who claim to be statesmen, who win over the mass of men to believe them to be statesmen, but are in actual fact nothing of the kind. Now, by the way, the true king here, let me put that in yellow. The true king here, it's actually phronimo is the Greek, phronimo. So it has the same root as phronesis, which is often translated as wisdom or mindfulness. And so here we have the adjective form. So we have the wise king or the mindful king. And that's what this translator called the true king. And so it is a nice translation, but it's nice to know what's behind it, what he means by true. The true king is the wise or mindful king. We must indeed, for this was the task set for our discussion. Do you think that any considerable number of men in a particular city will be capable, let me start that over. Do you think that any considerable number of men in a particular city will be capable of acquiring the art of statesmanship? That is quite out of the question. In a city with a population of 1,000, could 100, say, acquire it satisfactorily, or could 50, perhaps? Statesmanship would be the easiest of the arts if so many could acquire it. We know quite well that there would never be 50 first-class draft players among 1,000 inhabitants. That is, not if they were judged by proper inter-Hellenic standards. How much less can you expect to find 50 kings? For according to our former argument, it is only the man possessed of the art of kingship who must be called a king, though he is just as much a king when he is not in power as when he is. I'm going to highlight this statement here, because this is really a key idea that runs throughout this dialogue, that what we're looking for is not truly the king, but a state of mind and a way of being. And that's why we can see this dialogue following the Republic thematically, and that the Republic gave us the training of the philosopher king. This dialogue takes that philosopher king and puts them into action and saying, this is what the state, if you were to do that training, this is the state of mind of such a person. This is the way that person would manifest in the world. And of course, this applies to women as well as to men, even though it's the masculine terminology. Now, there's something curious that I found here. Those of you who've read The Republic may be aware that if you were to find the very center of that dialogue, there is a key statement. It is one that is so famous that even those of you watching this who have not yet read The Republic are probably familiar with it. It's the idea that we will never find respite from our ills until philosophers become kings or kings become philosophers. And this statement can be understood on multiple levels. On the surface level, it's pretty easy that the world would be a better place if most of our leaders were not so greedy and selfish and power hungry. But on a philosophical level, we see meaning in this statement in that those of us who, if you do this training of the philosopher, you need to put it into action. And those who are acting in the world need to be philosophers. And so it's the bringing together of the inner and the outer, or the contemplative and the active, not only having the insights, but actually living them and acting from them, whether you're on a public stage or just within your own sphere in private life. So the center of the Republic is significant. And when I was thinking about this video, I thought, this statement is a really significant one. And just eyeballing it, it seems about the middle. So I wondered, is this the center of the dialogue? And it would be quite appropriate, I would think, if it was. But what I found was actually more interesting. Let me just jump to another page, because there is actually a different statement that is the center. And it's even better. It's even better. It's this one in blue here, where he's talking about due measure. And remember, when he talked about due measure, this was talking about looking at justice, for example, here, not relative to how just are other people, so you only have to be as good as your neighbor. No, true justice is understood by looking to justice itself, or justice as we want to manifest it in this world is by looking to the divine, looking to that paradigm, and using that is what we measure ourselves against. That's what the philosopher king would do. And it says here that in fact it is precisely by this effort that they make to maintain the due measure that they achieve effectiveness and beauty in all they produce. And I'm going to actually read to you from another translation. It's even better than this. So overall, it's nice in general, I think, to have 2 or 3 different translations, because you'll find that each translator has their strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes one phrase is better in this translation, another sentence in another part of the dialogue. Another translator translated something better than that first one. And so it's nice to have different translations to look at. Overall, I really like the one that we're using here. That's why I'm using it, is because I think it reads very smoothly, and overall it is quite accurate. But this is the Harold Fowler and Walter Lamb translation. It's in the Loeb Classical Library. Here's how they translated it. It is in this way, when they preserve the standard of the mean, or the due measure, that all their works are good and beautiful. And I checked the Greek, and it is literally good and beautiful. Agatha Kai Kala. So Agatha is good, Kai is and, Kala is beauty. And so the good and the beautiful. And so this translator here put effectiveness I'm in place of good. I suppose that was this person's understanding, this translator's understanding, Skimp's understanding of effectiveness or of good, that it's effective. But using Agatha is actually better here, that it's good, because when we're looking to reality itself, to all that truly is, to the divine, we're looking at good, beauty, justice. And so when you see that there, then it really, when you put good in here, it really jumps out that this is what this whole dialogue is. As I just said before, that the Republic is the training of the philosopher king. This dialogue is putting that person into action. And this statement here, if you can just summarize what it would mean to put that state of mind into action, this is the perfect statement of it. It is by this effort to always be looking to the divine and measuring yourself against that, to one who's had that experience of the divine, who knows it, to always look to the absolute, to absolute justice, goodness, beauty, to look at that and to let that shape your world. All that you produce will be good and beautiful, because that is what you are measuring yourself against. So I just thought that was really cool. I didn't say it in the last video because honestly, I just hadn't found it or didn't remember that. How would I forget a thing like that though? But I didn't think of it until I saw this statement here, going back to where we are currently. And this is at 293, just above 293A, at the very end of 292E, is another key statement. Not quite the center of the dialogue, but still worthy of mention, that the art of kingship, the person who would be called king, is a king whether that person actually has political power or not. We're not actually talking about the political king. We're talking about the philosopher king as described in the Republic, as trained in the Republic. Okay, going back to where we are here, you have very rightly recalled that point, the stranger says. I think it follows that if the art of government is to be found in this world at all, in its pure form, it will be found in the possession of one or two, or at most of a select few. Okay, so we're talking about the art of government in its pure form. So we're not talking about actual politics per se. We're talking about the philosopher king. On this principle, it is the men who possess the art of ruling, and these only, whom we are to regard as rulers, whatever constitutional form their rule may take. It makes no difference whether their subjects be willing or unwilling. There again, we have an IOU. They may rule with or without a code of laws. They may be poor or wealthy. It is the same with doctors. We do not assess the medical qualification of a doctor by the degree of willingness on our part to submit to his knife or cautery or other painful treatment. Doctors are still doctors whether they work according to fixed prescriptions or without them, and whether they be poor or wealthy. So long as they control our health on a scientific basis, they may purge and reduce us, or they may build us up, but they still remain doctors. The one essential condition is that they act for the good of our bodies and make them better instead of worse, and treat men's ailments in every case as healers acting to preserve life. We must insist that in this disinterested scientific ability we see the distinguishing mark of true authority in medicine and of true authority everywhere else as well. Quite so. Now, of course, when we keep in mind that this analogy of the statesman to the philosopher king when we realize that that's the analogy we're working with and we're not truly looking at a politician, then this idea of the subjects being unwilling or ruling with violence, it's a little softer, right? We can kind of see it a little bit, but it's still it's troubling. So we still have that IOU. All right, then the Constitution par excellence, the only Constitution worthy of the name, must be the one in which the rulers are not men making a show of political cleverness, but men really possessed of scientific understanding of the art of government. Then we must not take into consideration on any sound principle of judgment whether their rule be by laws or without them, over willing or unwilling subjects, or whether they themselves be rich men or poor men. Okay, so again, repeating those 3 points. They may purge the city for its better health by putting some of the citizens to death or banishing others. They may lessen the citizen body by sending off colonies like bees swarming off from a hive. Or they may bring people in from other cities and naturalize them so as to increase the number of citizens. So long as they work on a reasoned scientific principle following essential justice and act to preserve and improve the life of the state so far as may be, we must call them real statesmen according to our standards of judgment, and say that the state they rule alone enjoys good government and has a real constitution. We must go on to say that all the other state fabrics called constitutions are not genuine, but counterfeit. They imitate the true constitutions. Those which we call law-abiding copy it fairly closely, but the rest are more or less shocking caricatures of it. I do want to point out here a few places where we might want to tighten up the English a little bit here. Counterfeit. It is an accurate translation here, but I think it's helpful to know that what he's talking about here is not being truly real. That's the Greek, not being truly real. So it's ontos. Ontos is the highest form of being. So in Greek language, they have a few different verbs that can all translate into English as to be. But we can sometimes talk about that which is in our physical realm, like this is a pencil. So I'm using a form of be, but it's not the same as I would talk about the absolute realities. So when I'm talking about absolute realities, or when the Greeks are talking about absolute realities, they would use the word ontos. And so so it's not just saying that it's counterfeit, it's saying it's not ontos. We must say that all the other state fabrics that are called constitutions, they're not genuine constitutions because they're not being truly real. They imitate the true constitutions. Those which we call law-abiding copy it fairly closely. Take that next phrase there. They copy it fairly closely. And what he's actually saying there is they closely attend to the beautiful. Now, if you've read some other dialogues where the beautiful is used to describe the experience and the vision of reality itself, then that takes on a deeper meaning. It's not just that they copy it closely, it's that they closely attend to the beautiful. So there are the true constitutions, and then there are those that closely attend to the beautiful. And so that would be one step down, right? And the rest are more or less shocking caricatures of it. They imitate what is base, and this is base not in the sense of good, but base as in the opposite of virtuous, as in bad. And so they imitate that which is bad. That's what is actually in the Greek here. Okay, so I wanted to point that out because this is a key section here. And even though this translator does have a nice smooth rhythm, to this translation. There are places where I think this person's was probably lacking in the spiritual awareness of this system, and so sometimes that came through in the translation. So I wanted to point those sections out. Okay, now as for what he's talking about here, purging the city. Let me go back. Okay, so they may want to purge the city for its better health by putting some of the citizens to death or banishing others. Okay, so you have this image of like a real tyranny going on here, right? They may lessen the city body by sending them off to colonies. Like, what's he talking about here? But if you were to take all of the various states of mind that are within you, that you see within yourself when you're alone with yourself, the voices that talk to you, the considerations you have, the various feelings that you have from moment to moment, if you were to personify all of them for the sake of, say, an artistic writing, then and then put this ruler, this part of you that rules your soul, that part of the soul that rules all of these states of mind, call that the king. And how does that king behave? And so there are certainly states of mind that you want to purify yourself of, unhealthy beliefs, things that you were taught in childhood that are not correct, your insecurities, your doubts, your feelings of smallness, all those things you want to banish. You want to purge yourself. You want to purge the city. If you think of your own soul as a city, there are things you want to purge out of the city for its better health. So there are some states of mind, some beliefs that we're going to call citizens in our personified city that we want to put to death or banish. We may want to lessen the citizen body because we want to be uniform. We don't want to be splintered off with our state of mind, sometimes this way, sometimes that way. We want to always be of one state of mind, be the same with everybody. Somebody like Socrates, he didn't act differently with these people than with those people. He may adjust his conversation to fit who he's talking to, but he's always of the same state of mind. He's not fractured in that way. And so he wants to lessen the citizen body or we want to do that so that we too can be of one mind. And you can take that throughout this section and you start to see how he is understanding what he's talking about with the real statesman, that part of the soul that rules us. When that is in a healthy state, and that, by the way, is the Republic, the training of the philosopher king, when that state of mind is achieved, how does this person behave? And so we're going to stop it there because we're going to go into a really interesting section next, but this would be a very long video if I were to go on from here. So I'm going to pause it here, but from the next time, we're going to come back to this one thing here that he still owes us. He still owes us an explanation of this idea that it doesn't matter if the subjects are willing or not. And it doesn't matter if he's even using violence. And you see a little bit of that here. Purging the city, lessening the city. The way he's describing it is quite violent. And you can see how that can be understood in a way that is actually quite healthy. So you already have a little bit he's already given us a little bit of that IOU, but he still has to go a little further with it. And so we're going to pick that up next time. If you have any questions or comments, anything you want to add to the conversation, please put that below. And as always, I thank you for watching. Until next time.